Allison McGovern was smiling. The rubber bands on her teeth in the photograph were red, not blue. You can honestly say you didn't kidnap her, rape her, murder her, anything like that. I was in San Francisco and I wouldn't do that shit. That was what I figured, pal. So you want to come help us look for her? Me? We've had the K-9 guys out this morning. Nothing so far, he sighed. Heck, Mike, I just hope she turns up in the Twin Cities with some dopey boyfriend. You think it's likely? I think it's possible. You want to join the hunting party? Shadow remembered seeing the girl in Henning's farm and home supplies. The flash of a shy, blue-braced smile. How beautiful he had known she was going to be one day. I'll come, he said. There were 24 men and women waiting in the lobby of the fire station. Shadow recognized Hinzelman and several other faces looked familiar. There were police officers and some men and women in the brown uniforms of the Lumber County Sheriff's Department. Chad Mulligan told them what Allison was wearing when she vanished. A scarlet snowsuit, green gloves, blue and woolen hat under the hood of her snowsuit, and divided the volunteers into groups of 3. Shadow, Hinzelman, and a man named Brogan comprised one of the groups. They were reminded how short the daylight period was. Told that if, God forbid, they found Allison's body, they were not to disturb anything, just to radio back for help, but that if she was alive, they were to keep her warm until help came. They were dropped off out on County W. Hinzelman, Brogan, and Shadow walked along the edge of a frozen creek. Each group of 3 had been issued a small handheld walkie-talkie before they left. The cloud cover was low, and the world was gray. No snow had fallen in the last 36 hours. Footprints stood out in the glittering crust of the crisp snow. Brogan looked like a retired Army colonel with a slim mustache and white temples. He had told Shadow he was a retired high school principal. I wasn't getting any younger. These days I still teach a little to the school play. That was always the high point of the year anyhow. And now I hunt a little and have a cabin down on Pike Lake. Spend too much time there. As they set out, Brogan said, on the one hand, I hope we find her. On the other hand, if she's going to be found, I'd be very grateful if it were someone else who got to find her and not us. You mean, you know what I mean? Shadow knew exactly what he meant. The 3 men did not talk much. They walked looking for a red snowsuit or green gloves or a blue hat or a white body. Now and again, Brogan, who had the walkie-talkie, would check in with Chad Mulligan. At lunchtime, they sat with the rest of the search party on a commandeered school bus and ate hot dogs and drank hot soup. Someone pointed out a red-tailed hawk in a bare tree, and someone else said that it looked more like a falcon, but it flew away and the argument was abandoned. Hinzelman told them a story about his grandfather's trumpet and how he tried playing it during a cold snap, and the weather was so cold outside by the barn, where his grandfather had gone to practice, that no music came out. Then after he came inside, he put the trumpet down by the wood stove to thaw. Well, the family are all in bed that night, and suddenly the unfrozen tune started coming out of that trumpet. Scared my grandfather so much she nearly had kittens. The afternoon was endless, unfruitful, and depressing. The daylight faded slowly. Distances collapsed, and the world turned in indigo, and the wind blew cold enough to burn the skin on your face. When it was too dark to continue, Mulligan radioed to them to call it off for the evening. They were picked up and driven back to the fire station. In the block next to the fire station was the Buck Stops Here Tavern, and that was where most of the searchers wound up. They were exhausted and dispirited, talking to each other of how cold it had become, how more than likely Allison would show up in a day or so. No idea of how much trouble she'd caused everyone. You shouldn't think badly of the town because of this, said Brogan. It is a good town. Lakeside, said a trim woman whose name Shadow had forgotten. If ever they'd been introduced, it is the best town in the North Woods. You know how many people are unemployed in Lakeside? No, said Shadow. Less than 20, she said. There's over 5,000 people live in and around this town. We may not be rich, but everyone's working. It's not like the mining towns up in the Northeast. Most of them are ghost towns now. There were farming towns that were killed by the falling cost of milk or the low price of hogs. You know what the biggest cause of unnatural death is among farmers in the Midwest? Suicide? Shadow hazarded. She looked almost disappointed. Yeah, that's it. They kill themselves. She shook her head. Then she continued, there are too many towns hereabouts that only exist for the hunters and the vacationers. Towns that just take their money and send them home with their trophies and their bug bites. Then there are the company towns where everything's just hunky-dory until Walmart relocates their distribution center or 3M stops manufacturing CD cases there or whatever. Suddenly there's a boatload of folks who can't pay their mortgages. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Ainsel, said Shadow. Mike Ainsel. The beer he was drinking was a local brew made with spring water. It was good. I'm Callie Knopf, she said, Dolly's sister. Her face was still ruddy from the cold, so what I'm saying is that Lakeside's lucky. We've got a little of everything here. Farm, light industry, tourism, crafts, good schools. Shadow looked at her in puzzlement. There was something empty at the bottom of all her words. It was as if he were listening to a salesman, a good salesman, who believed in his product, but still wanted to make sure you went home with all the brushes or the full set of encyclopedias. Perhaps she could see it in his face. She said, I'm sorry. When you love something, you just don't want to stop talking about it. What do you do, Mr. Ainsel? My uncle buys and sells antiques all over the country. He uses me to move big, heavy things. It's a good job, but not steady work. A black cat, the bar mascot, wound between Shadow's legs, rubbing its forehead on his boot. It leapt up beside him onto the beach bench and went to sleep. At least you get to travel, said Brogan. You do anything else? You got 8 quarters on you, asked Shadow. Brogan fumbled for his change. He found 5 quarters, pushed them across the table to Shadow. Callie Knopf produced another 3 quarters. He laid out the coins, 4 in each row. Then, with scarcely a fumble, he did the coins through the table, appearing to drop half the coins to the wood of the table from his left hand into his right. After that, he took all 8 coins in his right hand, an empty water glass in his left, covered the glass with a napkin, and appeared to make the coins vanish one by one from his right hand, and land in the glass beneath the napkin with an audible clink. Finally, he opened his right hand to show it was empty, then swept the napkin away to show the coins in the glass. He returned their coins, 3 to Callie, 5 to Brogan, then took a quarter back from Brogan's hand, leaving 4 coins. He blew on it, and it was a penny, which he gave to Brogan. He counted his quarters and was dumbfounded to find that he still had all 5 in his hand. You're a Houdini, cackled Hinselman in delight. That's what you are. Just an amateur, said Shadow. I've got a long way to go. Still, he felt a whisper of pride. They had been his first adult audience. He stopped at the food store on the way home to buy a carton of milk. The ginger-haired girl at the checkout counter looked familiar, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Her face was one big freckle. I know you, said Shadow. You're... And he was about to say the Alka-Seltzer girl, but bit it back and finished. You're Allison's friend from the bus. I hope she's going to be okay. She sniffed and nodded. Me too. She blew her nose in a tissue hard and pushed it back into her sleeve. Her badge said, Hi, I'm Sophie. Ask me how you can lose 20 pounds in 30 days. I spend today looking for her. No luck yet. Sophie nodded, blinked back tears. She waved the milk carton in front of a scanner and it chirped its price at them. Shadow passed her $2. I'm leaving this fucking town, said the girl in a sudden, choked voice. I'm going to live with my mom in Ashland. Allison's gone. Sandy Olson went last year. Joe Ming the year before that. What if it's me next year? I thought Sandy Olson was taken by his father. Yes, said the girl bitterly. I'm sure he was, and Joe Ming went out to California, and Sarah Lindquist got lost out on a trail hike, and they never found her. Whatever, I want to go to Ashland. She took a deep breath and held it for a moment. Then unexpectedly she smiled at him. There was nothing insincere about that smile. It was just, he guessed, that she had been told to smile when she gave somebody change. She told him to have a nice day. Then she turned to the woman with the full shopping cart behind him and began to unload and scan. Shadow took his milk and drove away past the gas station and the clunker on the ice and over the bridge and home. Coming to America, 1778. There was a girl, and her uncle sold her, wrote Mr. Ibis in his perfect copper plate handwriting. That is the tale. The rest is detail. There are accounts that if we open our hearts to them will cut us too deeply. Look, here is a good man, good by his own lights and the lights of his friends. He is faithful and true to his wife. He adores and lavishes attention on his little children. He cares about his country. He does his job punctiliously as best he can. So efficiently and good-naturedly exterminates Jews. He appreciates the music that plays in the background to pacify them. He advises the Jews not to forget their identification numbers as they go into the showers. Many people, he tells them, forget their numbers and take the wrong clothes when they come out of the showers. This calms the Jews. There will be life, they assure themselves. After the showers, our man supervises the detail, taking the bodies to the ovens. And if there is anything he feels bad about, it is that he still allows the gassing of vermin to affect him. Were he a truly good man, he knows he would feel nothing but joy as the earth is cleansed of its pests. There was a girl, and her uncle sold her. Put like that, it seems so simple. No man, proclaimed on, is an island. And he was wrong. If we were not islands, we would be lost, drowned in each other's tragedies. We are insulated, a word that means literally remember, made into an island, from the tragedy of others, but our island nature. And by the repetitive shape and form of the stories, the shape does not change. There was a human being who was born, lived, and then by some means or another died. There, you may fill in the details from your own experience, as unoriginal as any other tale, as unique as any other life. Lives are snowflakes, forming patterns we have seen before, as like one another as peas in a pod. And have you ever looked at peas in a pod? I mean, really looked at them. There's not a chance you'd mistake one for another. After a minute's close inspection, but still unique. Without individuals, we see only numbers. 1,000 dead, 100,000 dead, casualties may rise to 1,000,000. With individual stories, the statistics become people. But even that is a lie, for the people continue to suffer in numbers that themselves are numbing and meaningless. Look, see the child's swollen body and the flies that crawl at the corners of his eyes, his skeletal limbs? Will it make it easier for you to know his name, his age, his dreams, his fears? To see him from the inside, and if it does, are we not doing a disservice to his sister who lies in the searing dust beside him, a distorted, distended caricature of a human child? And there, if we feel for them, are they not more important to us than 1,000 other children touched by the same famine, 1,000 other young lives who will soon be food for the fly's own myriad squirming children? We draw our lines around these moments of pain and remain upon our islands, and they cannot hurt us. They are covered with a smooth, safe, nacreous layer to help them slip pear-like from our souls without real pain. Fiction allows us to slide into these other heads, these other places, and look out through other eyes. And then in the tale we stop before we die, or we die vicariously and unharmed. And in the world beyond the tale we turn the page or close the book and we resume our lives, a life that is like any other, unlike any other. And the simple truth is this: there was a girl, and her uncle sold her. That is what they used to say, where the girl came from. No man may be certain who fathered a child, but the mother, that you could be certain of. Lineage and property was something that moved in the matrilineal line, but power remained in the hands of the men. A man had complete ownership of his sister's children. There was a war in that place, and it was a small war, no more than a skirmish between the men of two rival villages. It was almost an argument. One village won the argument. One village lost it. Life as a commodity, people as possessions, enslavement had been part of the culture of those parts for thousands of years. The Arab slavers had destroyed the last of the great kingdoms of East Africa, while the West African nations had destroyed each other. There was nothing untoward or unusual about their uncle selling the twins. Although twins were considered magical beings, and their uncle was scared of them. Scared enough that he did not tell them that they were to be sold in case they harmed his shadow and killed him. They were 12 years old. She was called Wututu. The messenger bird, he was called Agasu, the name of a dead bird. They were healthy children because they were twins, male and female. They were told many things about the gods. And because they were twins, they listened to the things that they were told, and they remembered. Their uncle was a fat and lazy man. If he had owned more cattle, perhaps he would have given up one of his cattle instead of the children, but he did not. He sold the twins. Enough of him. He shall not enter further into this narrative. We follow the twins. They were marched with several other slaves taken or sold in the war for 12 miles to a small outpost. Here they were traded, and the twins, along with 13 others, were bought by 6 men with spears and knives who marched them to the west toward the sea. And then, for many miles along the coast, there were 15 slaves now altogether, their hands loosely bound, tied neck to neck. Wututu asked her brother Agasu what would happen to them. I do not know, he said. Agasu was a boy who smiled often. His teeth were white and perfect, and he showed them as he grinned, his happy smiles, making Wututu happy in her turn. He was not smiling now. Instead, he tried to show bravery for his sister, his head back and shoulders spread, as proud, as menacing, as comical as a puppy with its hackles raised. The man in the line behind Wututu, his cheeks scarred, said, "They will sell us to the white devils, who will take us to their home across the water." "And what will they do to us there?" demanded Wututu. The man said nothing. "Well," asked Wututu. Agasu tried to dart a glance over his shoulder. "They were not allowed to talk or sing as they walked." "It is possible they will eat us," said the man. "That is what I have been told. That is why they need so many slaves. It is because they are always hungry." Wututu began to cry as she walked. Agasu said, "Do not cry, my sister. They will not eat you. I shall protect you. Our gods will protect you." But Wututu continued to cry, walking with a heavy heart, feeling pain and anger and fear as only a child can feel it, raw and overwhelming. She was unable to tell Agasu that she was not worried about the white devils eating her. She would survive. She was certain of it. She cried because she was scared that they would eat her brother, and she was not certain that she could protect him. They reached a trading post, and they were kept there for 10 days. On the morning of the 10th day, they were taken from the hut in which they had been imprisoned. It had become very crowded in the final days, as men arrived from far away, bringing their own strings and skeins of slaves. They were marched to the harbor, and Wututu saw the ship that was to take them away. Her first thought was how big a ship it was. Her second, that it was too small for all of them to fit inside. It sat lightly on the water. The ship's boat came back and forth, ferrying the captives to the ship, where they were manacled and arranged in low decks by sailors, some of whom were brick red or tan skin with strange pointy noses and beards that made them look like beasts. Several of the sailors looked like her own people, like the men who had marched her to the coast. The men and the women and the children were separated, forced into different areas on the slave deck. There were too many slaves for the ship to hold easily, so another dozen men were chained up on the deck in the open, beneath the places where the crew would sling their hammocks. Wututu was put in with the children, not with the women. And she was not chained, merely locked in. Agasu, her brother, was forced in with the men in chains, packed like herrings. It stank under the deck. Although the crew had scrubbed it down since their last cargo, it was a stink that had entered the wood. The smell of fear and bile and diarrhea and death, of fever and madness and hate. Wututu sat in the hot cold and with the other children. She could feel the children on each side of her sweating. A wave tumbled a small boy into her heart, and he apologized in a tongue that Ututu did not recognize. She tried to smile at him. In the semi-darkness, the ship set sail. Now it rode heavy in the water. Ututu wondered about the place the white men came from, although none of them was truly white. Sea-burned and sunburned they were, and their skins were dark. Were they so short of food that they had to ascend all the way to her land for people to eat? Or was it that she was to be a delicacy, a rare treat for a people who had eaten so many things that only black-skinned flesh in their cookpots made their mouths water? On the second day out of port, the ship had a squall. Not a bad one, but the ship's decks lurched and tumbled, and the smell of vomit joined the mixed smells of urine and liquid feces and fierce sweat. Rain poured down on them in the bucket loads from the air gratings set in the ceiling of the slave deck. A week into the voyage and well out of sight of land, the slaves were allowed out of irons. They were warned that any disobedience, any trouble, and they would be punished more than they had ever imagined. In the morning, the captives were fed beans and ship's biscuits and a mouthful each of vinegared lime juice, harsh enough that their faces would twist. And they would cough and splutter, and some of them would moan and wail as the lime juice was spooned out. They could not spit it out, though. If they were caught spitting or dribbling it out, they were lashed or beaten. The night brought them salted beef. It tasted unpleasant, and there was a rainbow sheen to the gray surface of the meat. That was the start of the voyage. As the voyage continued, the meat grew worse. When they could, Ututu and Agasu would huddle together, talking of their mother and their home and their playfellows. Sometimes Ututu would tell Agasu the stories their mother had told them, like those of Alejba, the trickiest of the gods, who was great Mawu's eyes and ears in the world, who took messages to Mawu and brought back Mawu's replies. In the evenings, to while away the monotony of the voyage, the sailors would make the slaves sing for them and dance the dances of their native lands. Ututu was lucky that she had been put in with the children. The children were packed in tightly and ignored. The women were not always so fortunate. On some slave ships, the female slaves were raped repeatedly by the crew, simply as an unspoken perquisite of the voyage. This was not one of those ships, which is not to say that there were no rapes. 100 men, women, and children died on that voyage and were dropped over the side, and some of the captives who were dropped over the side had not yet died. But the green chill of the ocean cooled their final fever, and they went down, flailing, choking, lost. Ututu and Agasu were traveling on a Dutch ship, but they did not know this, and it might as easily have been British or Portuguese or Spanish or French. The black crewmen on the ship, their skins even darker than Ututu's, told the captives where to go, what to do, when to dance. One morning, Ututu caught one of the black guards staring at her. When she was eating, the man came over to her and stared down at her without saying anything. "Why do you do this?" she asked the man. "Why do you serve the white devils?" He grinned at her as if her question was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Then he leaned over so his lips were almost brushing her ears, so his hot breath on her ear made her suddenly feel sick. "If you were older," he told her, I would make you scream with happiness from my penis. Perhaps I will do it tonight. I have seen how well you dance." She looked at him with her nut-brown eyes, and he said, unflinching, smiling even, "If you put it in me down there, I will bite it off with my teeth down there. I am a witch girl, and I have very sharp teeth down there." She took pleasure in watching his expression change. She said nothing and walked away. The words had come out of her mouth, but they had not been her words. She had not thought them or made them. No, she realized those were the words of Alejba, the trickster. Mawu had made the world, and then, thanks to Alejba's trickery, had lost interest in it. It was Alejba of the clever ways and the iron heart erection who had spoken through her, who had ridden her for a moment. And that night before she slept, she gave thanks to Alejba. Several of the captives refused to eat. They were whipped until they put food into their mouths and swallowed, although the whipping was severe enough that 2 men died of it. Still, no one else on the ship tried to starve themselves to freedom. A man and a woman tried to kill themselves by leaping over the side. The woman succeeded. The man was rescued, and he was tied to the mast and lashed for the better part of a day until his back ran with blood, and he was left there as the day became night. He was given no food to eat and nothing to drink but his own piss. By the third day, he was raving, and his head had swollen and grown soft like an old melon. When he stopped raving, they threw him over the side. Also, for 5 days following the escape attempt, the captives were returned to their manacles and chains. It was a long journey and a bad one for the captives, and it was not pleasant for the crew. Although they had learned to harden their hearts to the business and pretended to themselves that they were no more than farmers taking their livestock to the market. They made harbor on a pleasant, balmy day in Bridgeport, Barbados, and the captives were carried from the ship to the shore in lowboats sent out from the dock and taken to the market square where they were, by dint of a certain amount of shouting and blows from cudgels arranged into lines. A whistle blew, and the market square filled with men poking, prodding, red-faced men shouting, inspecting, calling, appraising, grumbling. Mututu and Agasu were separated then. It happened so fast. A big man forced open Agasu's mouth, looked at his teeth, felt his arm muscles knotted, and two other men hauled Agasu away. He did not fight them. He looked at Mututu and called, "Be brave," to her. She nodded, and then her vision smeared and blurred with tears, and she wailed. Together they were twins, magical, powerful, apart from were two children in pain. She never saw him again but once, and never in life. This is what happened to Agasu. First, they took him to a seasoning farm where they whipped him daily for the things he did and didn't do. They taught him a smattering of English, and they gave him the name of Inky Jack. For the darkness of his skin, when he ran away, they hunted him down with dogs and brought him back and cut off a toe with a chisel to teach him a lesson he would not forget. He would have starved himself to death, but when he refused to eat, his front teeth were broken and thin gruel was forced into his mouth until he had no choice but to swallow or to choke. Even in those times, they preferred slaves born into captivity to those brought over from Africa. The freeborn slaves tried to run, or they tried to die, and either way, there went the profits.